Focus mode is more rational, sequential, and analytical thinking. All of these are associated with what it is you need for studying. So you need that analytical thinking. And also, I'm just going to jump right down to the end of this table and talk about essentially when you're in focus mode, it's like a pinball machine where the bumpers are all really close together. So your thoughts are only able to travel small differences between parts of your brain, and which is why it doesn't let you to take a step back and look at the bigger picture, to speak.
And of course, on the contrary, like we have with diffuse mode, like a pinball machine, like the has just said, the bumpers are far apart. Thoughts can travel further. And I feel like as well, if we can spin that analogy slightly, very quickly, let me just put it to you like this, okay? So say, for example, we have an ordered brick-like structure, okay?
Welcome back to not the BSP anymore, JxV Pod. We have taken another step up, and we've changed our name now. This is a bit more interesting, isn't it? Anyway, today we have a very interesting book to be uncovering, which is A Mind for Numbers by Barbara Oakley. And because it's such a jam-packed book in terms of information, we'll be splitting it over two episodes. In today's, we're going to be talking about the difference between active learning and passive learning, and also focused and diffuse mode, which we'll define later on, and how to shift between those two modes. Active and learning passing. What am I saying? Active and passive learning are two big concepts that we've tackled previously, so we're going to be building on that, talking about the key messages Barbara Oakley said, and giving you an insight from our own experiences into how we've experienced both of them and why active learning is much better. So without further ado, straight into it. Joseph, how are you feeling today?
Bro, I feel phenomenal because the concept that we're covering today, I think it's just ludicrous to comprehend the kind of pitfalls students are going to stop making by watching this pod today.
There you go. That's the number one reason to watch it. We're just trying to help you guys, point out some things that you might not realize you're doing yourself, and help you guys get much better grades, understand so much more things. And what am I waffling on about? Let's just talk about this, right? As Oakley points out, reading passively can give an illusion of competence without truly retaining information. This goes on to talk about the point, how many times have you, Joseph, read over a paragraph, read over a line in a textbook and not understood it first time, which means you've had to come back to it about 50 times just to understand it?
I'm looking around because everybody does this. I can't even, I literally did this before this podcast. I was doing some revision. I was reading this article for my dissertation, right? I've got to read like a lot of articles, right? And I'm just sat there like, because nothing's going in. I'm not actively just reading it to take it in, because there's one thing, especially when you're breaking down research papers and articles, you have a lot of you have statistical significance, you have the stats on one side, and then you have the kind of like the type of trial that was carried out, and as well as the investigations that were carried out towards this and where it was carried out. There are so many different factors that are involved in breaking down this article that I have right in front of me, and I'm just like, because nothing's going in. Okay? And I think this is something everyone does. I'm sure you've done it, Bihad, right?
I've done it too many times for it to be counted on one hand, 2 hands, 50 hands. It's so frequent, and it's inevitable that a student does it in their life. But I think another one occurrence that happens to me, I don't know if it happens to you, but something that happens to me is when I try to read a question in my head, I don't understand it the first time. then I try to read it aloud. I still don't understand it. And then I ask someone else to read it to me. I ask a teacher or a friend to read it to me. And suddenly when they say it, I get a light bulb moment. I'm like, oh my days, is that what the question is asking? And then I answer it. But I answer it correctly, but I'm not wrong. And the reason why is because there's a subtle difference in their expressions, but how they say it, that can trigger different parts of the brain or multiple parts of the brain that weren't triggered when you were reading it in your head. And this means that if you, when you're reading it, if you're only stimulating one part of the brain over and over again, and that part of the brain isn't going to help you answer the question, then you need something that triggers another part that might help you answer it, which is why when someone reads a question to you out loud, you suddenly have that light bulb moment. And I don't know, has this ever happened to you, Joseph?
100%. There have been times where, like, okay, there are two ways I like to think of this as. So 100%, when I'm reading a question in my head, I feel like it's not necessarily getting consolidated, but if I'm saying something out loud, I am listening to myself speak. So I think there is that level of segregation, okay? But to go that step further and to have somebody else, like a teacher or a student or a friend, just tell you, rather than for you to read it, for them to kind of like tell you firsthand and you're kind of listening to them, I feel like that just kind of ignites two different respects, because you can passively listen in a lecture where you're just mindlessly listening. There's a concept that you're really trying to get down and knuckle down, and to have like someone say it and you're just trying to like follow through with it, there's a big difference. There genuinely is a big difference. I feel like I am more able, if I've had someone like a friend go over a certain concept that we're both trying to knuckle down together, for them to explain it over myself like saying it to myself, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, and that's in fact an example of active learning, is it not? Trying to break down a concept or learn something with a group of friends. Now, Joseph, could you explain why a large group of friends, when studying with a large group of friends, is not as beneficial as studying with a smaller group of friends?
100%. So, especially imagine if you're in like, now I've worked in various different study groups. You know, at university you work with, you know, big groups, small groups. I feel like the ability to work in a close-knit team and to effectively ask each other, you know, quick-fire questions, that ability to feed off each other's chemistry and just being able to ask one person one question, because you have a track as to the type of questions you've asked. You have more of an awareness as to the kind of questions that are going around. Now, of course, this might differ between people, but this is more personal than it is anything else. Evidence might say one thing, but this is quite personal to me. I like to work in a small group, particularly when it comes to revising, because I feel like I could get distracted if I'm in a slightly larger group. I think as well as this, you know, distraction in a slightly larger group is one thing, but I think another really big point that I really want to say is the fact that you're even in a group to begin with, the ability to teach others concepts where you are kind of relying on the knowledge of how to kind of deliver and execute that content. And as we know, you know, teaching others, that's such an incredible revision strategy that we've kind of previously spoken about. And we know whose technique that is. That's the Feynman technique. That's the Richard Feynman technique, that Nobel Prize winning physicist who has essentially pioneered this revision strategy, which I feel has worked for me. But there are other things on the lines of active recall, which I think are huge as well. Because like you've said previously, you know, reading passively is a bad way to learn. Going through things and just being sat in a lecture but not actually being able to take in anything, you know, head on is very passive. Because I feel like also the format of a lecture sometimes can also be passive. But it gives you the illusion of competence without taking much of the information in. Okay? Now, Vihash, let me ask you this. What are some of the active recall strategies that you've utilized that has helped you?
Feynman technique. If you know me, you know that I love the Feynman technique. I've told you it before, so you've already said it yourself. Feynman technique is my number one go-to technique when I try to learn a new concept. Another one is creating flashcards. That's my way of trying to incorporate spaced repetition. Now, when I say using flashcards, what I mean is not just reading them in your head, pressing that spacebar button to reveal the answer. You need to be able to force yourself to test yourself with the concept. Try to memorize it word for word, what it is you've written in that flashcard. Now, I know there's a certain app. Quizlet incorporates this quite a lot, but I know Anki does this in a very good way. Joseph, could you just explain how Anki utilizes this whole idea of testing yourself, forcing you to come back to a concept?
Yeah. I'm so glad you asked me that, because it is absolutely crazy, this tool, guys. And I'm sure you guys have heard this through the productivity space. We're in the productivity space, but I feel like it just deserves justice, because when I'm going through my Anki flashcards, I have, like, say for example, you have the button for, again, I think hard, good, and easy, right? And each of these kind of has a relation to the point in which you need to revisit that content. And Anki, as an algorithm, will make sure that you revisit it. So say, for example, if you had something, let's say I have like an occlusion flashcard right in front of me, and I have, say, for example, I'm trying to look at the side effects of this calcium channel blocker, but I can't remember those side effects, right? What do? Well, I press, that was incredibly, well, I press again, it was hard, but I would press that again because I couldn't recall anything. Within 5 minutes, it is going to make sure that I recover that content. If I press hard, it would recover that content within 8 minutes. If I press good, it would have recovered that content within 10 minutes. If it was easy, I would have recovered that content within 2 hours. Now, when I say recover, it sounds like recover, like you're recovering, but what I mean is just to go over that content over again. But to kind of add on to what I just previously said, yeah, revisit, recover, revisit. Oh, that sounded so mad. That sounded so mad. Oh my god. Okay, sorry. Yeah. I don't know why I said it like that. Okay. Sorry. Back to what it is. Okay. So this is, you have to amend this in settings to do this. When you go over the content again, when you say again in 5 minutes, hard is 8 minutes, good is 10 minutes, easy is 2 hours, right? You need to change this in the settings. And I feel like this has helped me the most in making sure that I cover the content that I am confident with. As in, unfamiliar with, and then to then become confident with, to have that transition right there. But as well as this, guys, I do also want to touch on this study Viyash and I have come across. So this was a study that was conducted in 2013, October 2013 to May 2014. And this is the effect of passive and active education methods which have applied in repetition activities on the retention of anatomical knowledge. And this was tested on ultimately examining the long-term retention of anatomical knowledge from 180 students after various repetition activities. So say for example, where we define repetition activities in this study to be is essentially the format of repetition in this case for them was multiple choice tests, traditional lecture in a massive hall, collaborative small group work, like we previously touched on this, but they've utilized a strategy within this test as well, or an e-learning module. They also had a way in which they could tackle the type of curriculum as well, because they focused on more of a spiral curriculum which they strived for, where the teachers should be aware to facilitate the retrieval of earlier learned knowledge at the right position in the curriculum or at the right time during the students' individual learning path. So I think this kind of personalizes the level of learning and the depth of learning that the individual goes into. And of course, let's just dive straight into the conclusion. Like, guys, of course, it is concluded that the repetition of anatomical knowledge in any form is beneficial for students and will likely improve student outcomes in a curriculum that builds on prior knowledge. Of course, this is said that any technique which you do in any form, of course, it's going to be beneficial. But I think it's also worth mentioning that certain tests, like we have had with the multiple choice tests, it is going to be far more effective to utilize these tests in the long term to continually test yourself. That active process of being able to recall that knowledge is going to take you far. It genuinely is going to take you far.
Let me just
go on.
Let me just interrupt you there. I've experienced this, the negative impact of this firsthand. So when I was in a particular subject for GCSE, so essentially we have two exams for this particular subject. We have two exams for GCSEs that we need to cover first year, we're meant to cover the content for the first exam. Towards the end, we do a project work, and towards the beginning of the second year, we also continue with that project work, which leaves us about 5 months to cover the content for the second exam. In reality, we had about 1.5 months to maximum 2 months just before the exams to cover the content for the second exam. And what this meant was, when it came to revising for the first one, for the actual GCSEs, we did not have enough time to go back over the content and try to re-ingest all of the things that we had learned a year ago. So this meant that a lot of pressure was put on myself and students in my class to relearn the content, try to memorize it. Whereas if we had taken the approach that this study has just proven, whereby we go back to a piece of content or year one content, we will be able to, it would be much easier for us to relearn it at the end of the year, or for us to ace the exam without having to spend hours upon hours trying to revisit the content we did a year ago, which is why this study just goes to show consistency in what it is you're learning will always take you a step further and help you in 100%. A lot of ways, to put it bluntly. And I think with that being said, is there anything else you wanted to add on this study?
There is kind of one really big thing that I kind of really want to touch on that the study does mention. So we need to make that this study also underpins that any rehearsing act, including educational test, is beneficial as a scheduled repetition activity for long-term recall of that knowledge by students. So say, for example, starting a subsequent course or clinical rotation with repetition is very advantageous. So when the intention is to build upon or apply previously learned knowledge. So I feel like if you utilize the strategy that is said above here, I feel like saying word for word, this is something that I have done throughout pharmacy school. And in fact, I did during the summer, undertaking 3 different hospital pharmacy placements. And having the intention to learn, and then as well as going on this placement opportunity, so the clinical rotation between the different clinical units that I was going into, it allowed for more consolidation, not only in that respect, but also the knowledge I was going in with, the questions that I asked consultants, the pharmacists, so on and so forth. But as well as this, it's that ability to go hand in hand. So I have my pharmacy knowledge worth of 3 years that I built up, but then I also have expertise knowledge, clinical frontline knowledge, which kind of they're kind of putting onto me. They're asking me these questions, they're engaging me in these kind of discussions of this particular patient, the management strategies. Okay, Joe, can you go off and counsel this patient on this so-and-so medication? And of course, they will be supervising me whilst doing so. And I feel like there is also a balance that we need to bear in mind. And this kind of swiftly moves us on to focused and diffuse modes of thinking. Vihash, can you tell me a bit about focus and diffuse mode? And as well as this, your take on it.
Sure. So let's define what focused and diffuse mode is. Oakley highlights that the importance between switching between the two modes is essential for effective problem solving. So let's go with focus. So focus mode is just your concentration. So you're in a focus mode when you're studying. You've got your full attention down on what it is you're learning, and you've got no other distraction. On the contrary, you've got diffuse mode. Diffuse mode is when you're relaxed, you're doing something that doesn't require too much thought, too much concentration. So it could be something like walking, it could be sleeping, it could be a multitude of things that don't require much concentration. And the ability to switch between the two is what optimizes your ability to recall information, memorize information, and learn new concepts and information. But the issue with relying on one, i.e. the issue with relying on focused mode when it comes to studying is that it can lead to a lot of mental roadblocks called Einstellung, if I'm saying that right. And when I was younger and I thought, oh, studying, I need to study, all I thought in my head was, I need to study for hours and hours on end. I need to be sitting for 3 or 4 hours, and then at the end of the day, that gives me an excuse to not study, because at that time I was a bit young. I didn't really understand the benefits of studying and how to go about it. Whereas in actuality, this approach to revising did not allow me to remember any of the content that I had studied earlier on in the day. And I began to realize that I was simply using it as an excuse to not study, as like a trophy, which is what then led me to change the way I go about studying. And that's to incorporate my personal time, if you like, in with my studying, which leads us to talk about the Pomodoro technique, which is it's being talked about a lot now on the internet and social media.
Okay. Pomodoro technique. Go.
Cool. So this is the Pomodoro technique, which we talked about a lot, and it's being talked about a lot on the internet. Joseph, could you just explain what the Pomodoro technique is and why 100%. It's such a big 100%. Thing now?
Just to put it simply, guys, because I feel like Pomodoro technique in and of itself deserves its own podcast and episode of its own. But to put it simply, guys, you have 25 minutes of focus mode, 5 minutes just to take your mind off it and just really just do your own thing, okay? Allow yourself that time to consolidate all the information that you've ultimately just been able to take on. So Barbara Oakley says that the more time you have between focus sessions, the more likely you are to make breakthroughs. And I think this is so prevalent now more than ever before, because we have techniques like that are just given to us on a plate, like we have with Pomodoro technique. Like you just said, Vihat, what is the Pomodoro technique? So well, the Pomodoro technique is essentially 25 minutes of focus mode, 5 minutes of rest, allowing for you to kind of consolidate that 25 minutes of focus. And let's say, okay, in a 6-hour study session, guess how much time you just take as rest? 6-hour productive study session. Guess how much time you just take off as rest during that 6 hours? 1 hour. Okay. Yeah, I know you knew it was 1 hour, but I just cool.
Jeez.
But the fact of the matter is,
no, it's for the show.
It's for the show. The fact of the matter is, guys, if you put it like this, there have been a multitude of situations where I have tried to sit down for 6 hours or something extortionate like that, but not actually work for 6 hours, but only work for, let's say, 3 hours. But when I have incorporated what's known as the Pomodoro technique, it has allowed me to work that kind of, go that extra mile. But we also need to bear in mind, there are also certain times of the year I kind of utilize this technique. I don't actually utilize this very frequently during the semester, but it's more so during exam season, because I feel like there's an element of the Pomodoro technique which allows me to kind of like settle down a little bit. When I'm normally revising, I feel like I study when I study and I take a break when I take a break. There's that kind of like shift that I have. But during exam season, I feel like I'm in that flow state. Would you say that you agree, Vihat? Were you in a bit of a flow state during? Yeah, it's like that sort of thing where you're kind of like in that.
Yeah, 100%. Sorry, there's a bit of delay, so it's really hard to interrupt when you're in your flow.
Say what you want to say.
But I was just saying that when you are in exam season, I think the pressure of trying to learn all the content and trying to study is what leads to an increased flow in studying and revising.
100%. Okay, so this kind of really just swiftly moves us on to breaking down what it is that we have between focus mode and diffuse mode. So Vihat, let me ask you this question. What part of the brain does focus mode kind of focus on? That's weird. I don't know why I phrased it like that. Okay, well, yeah, go on then. So what part of the brain does focus mode focus
essentially, on? It involves the brain's prefrontal cortex. So that's, I'll bring up an image here, but that's the front of your brain, essentially involved with cognitive thinking and abilities. And I just wanted to say one thing. Remember when we talked about mental roadblocks with concentrating too much on the focus mode and being in the focus mode for too much? The reason why we have mental roadblocks when we're in that state of mind is because the prefrontal cortex is more prone to an increase in stress than any other part of the brain. So this is why when I was saying before, when I felt more stressful and I didn't remember much information when I was studying for long hours on end, because I was in the focus mode for too much. I was engaging that area of the brain too much, which means that because of the stress buildup, I wasn't able to remember as much information. And the causation can also be reversed. So the stress can prevent a longer period hours of studying. So they're interchangeable. And it was just that's all I wanted to say with the relation between the area of the brain and the stress buildup as a result.
That's great. Like what you just said. Let's compare that with diffuse mode. Boom. So with diffuse mode, it's not really necessarily related or kind of affiliated with any particular part of the brain. But let's say, for argument's sake, the right side of the brain seems to be more tied with the diffuse kind of like scanning of the environment, interacting with people and processing emotions. Now, to put this in respect as well, with what I've just previously said, hopefully Vihash will put a picture up of what diffuse mode looks like, because what I'm about to say is going to blow your mind. Because diffuse mode, it allows for the bigger picture to form. Because without diffuse mode, building up a conceptual understanding of a given topic, it is going to be extremely hard. And I tell you guys that for a fact. Because, there's two ways you can kind of really go about this. You have a complicated concept at hand right in front of you. Vihash, let me ask you this. You have a complicated concept right in front of you right now, and you have to try and break this down. It's got intricate passage. It's got all these different types of jargon. I'm going to throw that word in there. Jargon, It's throwing you off left, right, and center. For you to take that on, head on, without any of the resources, without breaking it down step by step, and taking that necessary break, do you think you would be able to build that bigger picture with diffuse mode?
No, I won't. I really won't be able to, because as Barbara Oakley said, you need to be able to switch between the two in order to optimize how much it is that you learn, how much it is that you remember. So shifting between the two and giving both their credit is
that's great. That's great. And
for you to learn anything
on that topic, right? On the contrary to what diffuse mode diffuse mode is building the bigger picture. How do we define what kind of focus mode is in that sense?
Oh, sure. So focus mode is more rational, sequential, and analytical thinking. All of these are associated with what it is you need for studying. So you need that analytical thinking. And also, I'm just going to jump right down to the end of this table and talk about essentially when you're in focus mode, it's like a pinball machine where the bumpers are all really close together. So your thoughts are only able to travel small differences between parts of your brain. And which is why it doesn't let you to, take a step back and look at the bigger picture, to speak.
And of course, on the contrary, like we have with diffuse mode, like a pinball machine, like Vihash has just said, the bumpers are far apart. Thoughts can travel further. And I feel like as well, if we can spin that analogy slightly, very quickly, let me just put it to you like this, So say, for example, we have an ordered brick-like structure, That is like how I like to think it as focus mode. This is like a very rigid, giant ionic lattice structure. That is what I like to think of focus mode as, Diffuse mode, I like to think of diffuse mode as our gaseous-like state. Our ability to kind of bounce with, crazy kinetic energy, half mv squared, boom, kinetic energy. That's wow, I don't know where that's come from. Wow. So back to what it is I was trying to say. The two states that we have, I like to think of our focus mode as our solid state, where it is our rigid, focused, kind of sequential ordering, as you've said, of the way that we kind of dissect an activity. But our diffuse mode, right? Our ability to kind of go into a gaseous state and just kind of bounce of ideas. We have lots of thoughts going on, but this can go off in the back.
So we want to know how to shift between focus and diffuse mode. Sure, let's get this out of the way. Diffuse mode, if we give some examples of what you can do when you're in a diffuse mode, it can be anything from taking a walk, doing a run, playing some instrument, playing with your friends online on the Xbox, PlayStation, anything like that, taking a shower, doing some cooking. But sleeping 100%. Is the biggest time you're in the diffuse mode. I think one issue that we need to address here is when you're, we said before, diffuse mode is roughly 5 to 10 minutes tops. If you're thinking of going for a run in those 5 to 10 minutes, you need to think about how realistic that is, how long it will take you to get ready for that run. Things like getting your water bottle, putting your shoes on, jackets on, going for the run, coming back, sitting down, taking some rest. You're not going to be able to do that in just a couple minutes. So you need to be realistic in terms of the activities you can do when you're moving away from your studying time. And the other thing is when the importance of diffuse mode, shifting between the focus and diffuse mode, is that you'll have constantly in the back of your head, you'll have the thought of doing something that's not studying stuck in your head, and you can use it as almost like 100%. A motivation to keep studying, and it can increase your productivity. So Joseph, I don't know if you felt this before, but would you say you utilize this phenomenon where you have something that you'd like to do playing in the back of your head, which has allowed you to be more productive when you're in focus mode?
Especially when I'm revising for exams, deadlines are approaching, midterm assessments, it's going to lead to a mindset of stress and burnout. But allowing myself to step back and just like consolidate some of the information for a moment, I would be, really just kicking myself back 5 minutes minimum, putting on a podcast and just allowing myself to relax. Now, of course, there are kind of two ways to go about this. There are kind of stress reliever strategies, would be, for example, running, right? But also, on the contrary, there are also states where I want to remain focused for long periods. So I wouldn't kind of necessarily refer to a run or going to the gym or necessarily going out, because I want to stay kind of like focused, but also be able to seamlessly transition into diffuse, if you get what I mean, and then allow myself to stay in that state of transitioning between the two, but also making sure that I get the most out of that productive session, or that 6 hour to 8 hour study session, which will be broken down into study blocks, which will be made up of a series of breaks and focus, time which I would have invested ultimately. But if you can, Vihar, can you summarize for me in short the transition between focus and diffuse mode, and how effectively we as students can do that, just simply?
Sure. So we've already said the Pomodoro technique is the best technique that allows you to shift between. So if you set a timer, 25 minutes productive studying, that is not to say when you set that timer for 25 minutes that you go onto social media instantly. No, 25 minutes productive learning, no ifs, buts, or maybes. And then as soon as that 25 minutes is done, give yourself a 5-minute break. So go to do something. For me personally, drumming I find helps because I can really easily put it into my Pomodoro timetable. So something that takes only 5 minutes. And then as soon as that 5 minutes are done, no excuses, back to the 25 minutes productivity. And then once that is done, back to the 5 minutes break. And by the time you know it, hours would have passed by. And the really good thing about shifting like this constantly is that your brain is constantly being engaged in different ways. And while you're in those 5 minutes break, you're able to make those neural 100%. Connections that you're not able to when you're in the focus mode. And the other thing I wanted to say was when you're in at the end of this revision session, you have that sense of achievement. You have you're like, oh yes, I've just done a really productive 3 hours or even 2 hours or even 1 hour of a study session using the Pomodoro technique. And believe it or not, when you go to sleep that night, when you're in that diffuse mode, you will make more neural connections than if you didn't use 100%. Barbara Oakley's technique.
With using that reward strategy as a mechanism to make sure that your focus is heightened during your periods of focus. That's perfect. The way in which you summarize that, you have hit that nail on the hammer. Hit that nail on the hammer. Hit the hammer on the nail. Oh, I don't know what I'm saying. Okay, you know what? Let's wrap this up. Listen, guys. Okay, to put it simply, active learning versus passive learning, focus and diffuse mode. These are the biggest concepts that we've covered in today's pod. And really, the main message that we are trying to get off to you guys today is don't fall into the common pitfalls of just mindlessly reading away, but more so use the strategies that you have at play, but use them appropriately, because you can always use, say, flashcards, right? There are ways that you could use them passively. You could just be mindlessly just reading through the question, reading through the answer, throwing the flashcard away. Another big thing is making sure that toxic productivity does not take over your life. The shift between focus and diffuse mode is integral to making sure that you internalize the information that you have at hand. Because without that ability to switch between these two modes, it is going to be incredibly difficult. So making sure, guys, you are focused for a period of time and you are taking the necessary steps to making sure that you are in diffuse mode for a period of time. Viyash, is there anything that you'd like to add on?
Yes, that was a wonderful conclusion, Joseph. It's been a pleasure speaking to you about this book, doing a cheeky little book review. And we'll do a part 2 to this later on in the week, where we talk about overcoming procrastination, which is a huge topic. I'm looking forward to it. And also how your memory works, 2 types of different memories, and how to go about trying to memorize something the best way possible. So until then, keep studying, keep having fun, utilize the techniques we just talked about, that Barbara Oakley talked about.
Take care. JxV Pod out.